Greetings, everybody. Let me welcome you to Patrick Henry College as we continue this week's Newsmaker interview series with Dr. Marvin Olasky. One of the privileges of having someone like Marvin Olasky on our faculty is that he's able to bring us people of considerable national and sometimes international repute. He himself, of course, in that category, as you know. Marvin Olasky is the author of a number of highly influential books on public policy and cultural matters, including The Tragedy of American Compassion, the book Compassionate Conservatism, and others. You may also know that Dr. Olasky is the editor-in-chief of World Magazine. Many of our students enjoy working with Dr. Olasky and Mrs. Olasky, internships and writing projects, learning a lot of new things. We really appreciate the way that Marvin Olasky contributes to our faculty. Of course, he holds our distinguished chair in journalism and public policy, as you may know. And so because of his relationship with World Magazine, you know, we've got those in our studio audience today, so to speak, also those joining us via live webcast. We welcome them. And ultimately, there'll be some 400,000 readers of World Magazine joining us in today's experience because Marvin Olasky writes these up as interviews, which typically get published in the magazine in later issues. So today, it is our pleasure to have not only Marvin Olasky, but also those he's interviewing today, Natasha Srdoc and Joel Anand Samy, who co-founded together the Adriatic Institute for Public Policy, which is an organization committed to advancing economic freedom in the Balkan region, a historically troubled but extraordinarily beautiful and productive part of the world. Through their leadership, the Adriatic Institute for Public Policy has engaged in a robust endeavor to promote the rule of law, judicial reforms, protection of property rights, and efforts to combat corruption and organized crime in the post-communist and post-war Balkan region. They also co-founded and co-chaired the International Leaders Summit, a platform bringing together successful reformers, free market proponents, entrepreneurs, and business, media, and political leaders to advance pro-growth reform initiatives. In 2005, they co-authored a book called The Flat Tax, The Case for Tax Reform. Srdoc has spoken at events and conferences hosted by the Heritage Foundation, the Institute of Economic Affairs, the Reason Foundation, Atlas Economic Research Foundation, as well as a host of other think tanks and organizations. Her articles and commentaries have appeared in the Financial Times, Wall Street Journal, Washington Times, and elsewhere. Anand Samy's interviews and commentaries have appeared in The Economist, Detroit Free Press, the European Voice, Wall Street Journal, and USA Today. So please welcome Marvin Olasky and his guests, Natasha Srdoc and Joel Anand Samy.
Thank you.
Well, it's a great pleasure to have both of you here because not only have you co-founded a public policy institute and co-founded other things, but you also co-founded a marriage. And that's wonderful that people can write a book together and the marriage can survive.
Yes, indeed.
And especially a book on the flat tax. So that's very good. Natasha, you have an economics degree and an MBA. Tell us a little bit about your background.
Right. Actually, I was born in Croatia. Croatia was part of former Yugoslavia. We share Adriatic Sea with Italy. It's a beautiful country, and I actually was educated in Croatia. I did my economy university in Croatia, and then I did MBA in the United States. I had experience in banking industry before coming to the States, and the experience in the United States studying here and just being immersed in a different culture, in a wonderful mindset, and that you can sense that the original concept of we the people and the concept of the nation that is based on the rule of law, protection of property rights, independent judiciary, I really enjoyed studying here, being here, and I thought of replicating these ideas and the reforms that were needed in Croatia and the region of the Balkans.
Okay. And when you came here, let's see, how are we doing on mics? Okay. When you came here, did you originally come out of a desire to understand more about the United States or a desire to escape Croatia?
Right. It was more about desire to learn and to come to see how the United States operates. It was my first visit and my first stay in the United States. And it is interesting that Bentley University was a really pro-market MBA studying, that I actually received a very pro-market education. I read about Alvin Rabushka and the flat tax before I met him. I actually read about him in books of economics at the university, and then I had the privilege to meet with him, and then he became advisor, actually, member of advisory board of Adriatic Institute of Public Policy. So it was a unique experience, and it's worlds apart, actually, when you think about the United States and the founders' idea of how to create a nation, how mindset of the people is today in the United States compared to what is going on in Croatia, in the Balkans, and I would say even in Europe, when we look at the European Union at this time.
And as I understand that you are not particularly popular now with the governing authorities in Croatia.
Right, I'm not.
Why is that?
The problem is with corruption. The problem is that the existence of political corruption is such that at this stage we have a coexistence of organized crime and political corruption, and which allows both to flourish is the lack of independent judiciary, the lack of rule of law. And these things cannot be dealt from within, because the political establishment is controlling the media, is controlling judiciary and economy, has actually prevented or has blocked judiciary reform, has blocked separation of powers to have pure independent judiciary, and it continues to plunder without any punishment. And this goes on, and as I said, it cannot be dealt from within. And actually, Joel and I became enemies of the state at the time when we started talking about these issues in international arena, by bringing the facts and the developments that are going on in Croatia to Financial Times, to the Wall Street Journals, to BBC. At that time, this was not very welcome in Croatia because they realized that they will have to deal with it because of transatlantic organizations such as NATO and the European Union have to be aware of what is going on in Croatia, because these things should be addressed, because we don't live in separate worlds. So what is going on in the Balkans, with the Balkan route originating in Afghanistan, and trafficking of humans, arms, drugs, even organs, and bringing proceeds of crimes to terrorist groups that are attacking us in the West. Again, this is not something that we could ignore. We cannot afford to ignore what's going on in the Balkans.
We'll delve more into that in a moment, but I just want to ask Joel of ancestry from Fiji. How did you become interested in the Balkans?
Well, my grandparents, as I mentioned, from southern India, from the great state of Kerala, via the British Empire, were able to come to Fiji for a short period of time. I had the privilege of being born in Fiji, but coming to the United States when I was 2.5 years old. So I certainly consider myself an American, and through education, I would say that, and through what we saw in the Balkans in the 1990s, I believe compelled us to get more involved, to respond to the needs. I mean, we were watching international news where people were being slaughtered. 250,000 people were exterminated in the 1990s while the world watched. And Europe did not do a thing to resolve those issues. And it was the American intervention, which Margaret Thatcher called a just intervention, to bring a halt to the ethnic cleansing that was taking place. So I had the privilege of working with Dr. David Roth, a trusted confidant of General Colin Powell, and a group of private citizens in responding to the needs of the people in Croatia, Bosnia, and then later on in Kosovo. I just did not want to be a bystander, and was privileged to work with good people in addressing some of those very fundamental issues.
So in the United States, we have periodically had some interest in the Balkans. For the most part, it hasn't, the Balkans have not registered very much on American media radar and even State Department radar. Certainly people became aware of the Balkans 100 years ago on June 28th, 1914, when the assassination of the Austrian Archduke Franz Ferdinand was the incident that over the next month got World War I started. And then I suppose there's periodically been interest. Certainly there was American military interest in the 1990s. But now the Balkans are off the radar again, it seems. So let me just ask, I'll put it very bluntly to both of you, why should Americans care?
Right. My family lived in 6 different countries in the last 100 years without ever leaving their home. And my paternal grandfather was recruited by Austro-Hungarian Empire as a 17-year-old boy to fight in the trenches. My maternal father, our grandfather, actually died during actually defending local community from Nazi soldiers. My mom was only 3 years old. My father is a survivor, concentration camp survivor, and his younger brother died of malnutrition. Our house was burned by Rommel troops that were withdrawing from North Africa via Italy through the Balkans into Germany. So the area, and then we had recent Balkan wars in the 90s. What we've seen is that American involvement in the World War I actually hastened the end of the war. The American involvement in the Second World War, when American troops landed on the Italian peninsula in September of '43, hastened the end of the World War II. And actually that day when American troops landed on the Italian peninsula, my family was freed from concentration camp. And recently we saw again that because of American involvement, and NATO forces, we saw end of the war, of the Balkan wars of the 90s. So American involvement is has been so crucial in the region, and I believe that through U.S. leadership again, we can only see changes on the ground. I'm saying that because we have in our work through Adriatic Institute, we have worked with legislators and brief legislators in Brussels, in European Union, legislators in the US. We had an event at Capitol Hill. We're talking with policymakers and with politicians, and we realize that there is a more principled approach from the US side than what we see is going on in Europe at this stage. We have seen that US has been involved in the region through different mechanisms, try to, let's say Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, for example, going after companies that were involved in bribing government officials, or US Permanent Subcommittee on Investigations, actually having an investigation into a bank, a Liechtenstein bank owned by royal family, that was accused of helping taxpayers, actually of the US, evade taxes, dodge creditors, and court orders. This would have a greater impact on what's going on in the Balkans, because what we've seen in the last 20 years is that the massive, colossal corruption has been facilitated by money laundering via Austrian and Liechtenstein's banking and corporate institutions, and that has to stop. It cannot be dealt again from within the Balkans. Europe did not show a real power to deal with these issues, and we have seen successful mechanisms for the US side in dealing with money laundering and political corruption, which is tied to bribing government officials, or FCPA.
Okay, let's make sure we have some basic facts on this, because again, so many of us are unfamiliar with the Balkans. We're talking about a population of about 50 million people in the region?
Roughly, yeah.
And this includes Romania, Bulgaria, the countries that made up the former Yugoslavia, and Albania, basically, is what we're talking about. I suppose Greece also would be considered part of the Balkans?
If we take Greece and all these countries, it would be 54 million people.
Okay. And what percentage of of the youth are, as we start to look at problems, what percentage of the youth are unemployed?
The percentage is very high. For Croatia, it is around 53% unemployment among the youth, and for, let's say, for Bosnia, is the worst. In the region, it's 60% unemployment. Other countries stay a little better. Serbia is not, I think, also very high youth unemployment, but Romania and Bulgaria, I think, are having better statistics. Also, they joined EU a few years ago, and then there's more of migration as well from those countries into the West.
Okay, so lots of people there, the age of the students here, they're unemployed, they're not going to college. What do they do all day?
Right, and that is a problem. That is a problem because there's a huge apathy. They're looking for purpose, and these years, I mean, of the youth today, if they don't find employment right away, they lose the skills. They lose the knowledge that they have gained through the education cannot be deployed, and the skills are not developed in the right time. And as the time goes by, it's much harder to find a job in the profession of what they've studied. And as that lingers on, it can become a real problem that there will be a large group of people, very educated people, that will not be able to work in their profession or the education, the basis of the education provided, but will have to be forced to do some other less professional, let's say, the work that would not be really, they wouldn't be eager to do, I would say.
So in this country, people would sometimes talk about idle hands leading to mischief. Their idle hands leading to terrorism, leading to drug smuggling. What do they? How will they occupy themselves without jobs and really without clear economic futures?
If I could just mention the fact that we do have high rates of unemployment in the United States. That is a problem in much of Europe. And Europe as a whole has ignored the issues of youth unemployment because also Spain has very high rates of youth unemployment. I think the most serious problems that Europe and Croatia, Bosnia have is a dependency that is created upon the state with individuals that are unemployed, without any purpose, and of course mischief, trouble is going to be their close ally, unfortunately. But we have seen an entire generation, in a sense, wasting their most promised years, and promising years. And I think that is a tragedy, not only for Croatia, Bosnia, but for Brussels and for the United States, that pours millions of dollars into this region. And over a 10-year period of time, we have seen the West, United States, the European Union, and other countries like Switzerland and Nordic states invest over $100 billion into the Balkans. But during that same period of time, we've seen $111.6 billion leave these nations to Western financial institutions in Austria, Liechtenstein, and beyond. And so there is a tremendous problem, a very real issue to address in having unreformed governments that are blocking independent voices, calling reform-oriented leaders enemies of the state, having fraudulent elections like in Croatia, having 1 million illegal voters for a country of 4 million people. So as we look at what happened in Ukraine, we may easily see a Balkan uprising, just with looking at what happened in Sarajevo just a few weeks ago, when Tuzla, Mostar, and Sarajevo, there were violent protests there.
And when you mention, what is youth going to do, we also tap into something very, very detrimental, which is human trafficking. The last year's U.S. State Department's human trafficking report for Croatia stated that the girls and women from United States, Bosnia and Herzegovina, Serbia, and other parts of Eastern Europe are subjected to sex trafficking in Croatia. This was shocking to see because for the first time we saw that there's mention also of the U.S. women and girls, and it is mentioned only for the country of Croatia. and also that the children are exploited in prostitution on the Adriatic Sea, especially during the peak season. This is a reflection of the high youth unemployment and also of high unemployment, because as we have read reports, much of the human trafficking, which is a $32 billion industry, or you don't know how to call it, criminal industry, 32 billion, it's alluring, actually, it's trying to get that youth that doesn't have hope, that doesn't have good jobs, and it's getting into something as a promise of a good job in a different country. That's how they get into it, not knowingly.
Yeah. Now you're saying that the United States and the European Union countries have sent more than $100 billion into the Balkans, ostensibly for economic reconstruction, for fighting poverty, but largely it's gone to oligarchs and criminals who then deposit it in banks for their own. Go ahead.
It's very interesting when you think about $100 billion. That is a significant amount of money. For Croatia, that had illicit financial outflows of 17 billion. It doesn't mean much when we have a $17 trillion debt in America. But $17 billion in Croatia means 30% of its 2012 GDP. It is significant. And so when we see that hemorrhaging taking place, we're not seeing young leaders rising up in the field of judiciary looking for an honest calling, as Natasha calls it, a principled calling, but involved in other things rather than building a country and creating a more virtuous society. So we see how aid is certainly not the answer. Throwing money to corrupt networks is not the answer. Throwing another $34 million into Bosnia this year is not the answer. It is important to raise leaders that are principled, to identify individuals that can create the real changes from within, and to help establish the rule of law. And the problem that I see with the Balkans is something that we talked about just before this time here, Dr. Olasky, is that there has been an interesting comparison analysis when you look at the Balkans and the Baltics. The Baltics had what I call the Baltic blessings of Estonia and some of the countries having a positive influence from Scandinavia and perhaps a couple of the important initiatives of higher ethics and principles. But for the Balkans, we had the Balkan curse. We had Austria, Liechtenstein, that don't have strong rule of law nations. Austria really never went through a real reform. And Austria is known not just only of promoting and allowing corruption to flourish in the Balkans, but also Ukraine. Austrian banks, which are mostly state-owned. We think about the Sound of Music when we think about Austria, but it gives another tune when we look at how it's promoting colossal corruption in Eastern Europe. And I believe that Austria, Liechtenstein could be well considered rogue states that are part of that problem in creating the mess that we see in the Balkans and the rest of Eastern Europe.
Now, we've seen, and it's well established now, that in Africa, a lot of the government-to-government aid has gone through the same path of being misused, misappropriated, and basically gone to build up the power of dictators rather than actually helping ordinary folks to flourish and develop peaceful and legal institutions. The better way I think people are finding in Africa is to work through churches and a variety of Christian organizations. My wife and I have been to a number of countries in Africa, and we've seen that as effective. Is that an option in the Balkans, to work through the churches, or is there corruption there also?
I would say it would be 90% of Croatian population would be nominally Catholic.
Okay.
A Catholic Church has not been favored in recent years because of their alignment with the political establishment that has been very corrupt. And also the fact that there has been an agreement that was signed with Vatican during Tudjman's time, which was the first president of independent Croatia, but a very corrupt, kind of a dictator. So probably that agreement imposes a huge amounts of taxpayers' money to be paid to Catholic churches in a non-transparent way. And since the 2008 economic crisis, where Croatia is really dipping significantly, falling at 2% per year, with very high unemployment.
The GDP is declining by 2%
yes,
a
by
year?
2% a year.
Okay.
So it's in all that the Catholic Church with almost the same amount of funding that they would want to receive, and being aligned with corrupt regime, is not looked upon favorably. So from that perspective, I don't think it would be effective to work through Catholic Church in Croatia. I believe that we can use the U.S. leadership actually going after the banks that were involved in money laundering, but from the U.S. side's taxpayers' perspective, that there could be a mechanism established whereby the confiscation or actually repatriation of illicit financial outflows, which actually Joe mentioned, because there are statistics, there are numbers that are showing that there's some $116 billion left the entire region of the Balkans from 2001 to 2010 via crime, corruption, tax evasion to foreign banks. For Croatia in particular, it was $17 billion, so 30% of the GDP that left the country. There's no point of sending money to the corrupt government if the same amount is leaking through the budget out of the country. But if we would find mechanism to stop that hemorrhaging of the budget, and also to bring back the monies that have been deposited in the banks in Liechtenstein or Austria, that would mean a lot, not just for taxpayers and for the budget to be filled up again, but also what we need to see in moving forward. We have to establish the rule of law, independent judicial protection of property rights, because without that foundation, we cannot see investments to come from as a foreign investors, or some of the individuals that have property that are not deploying it because they are fearful they're going to lose it. So what we need to see is the establishing of the foundation so that we can have investors come in, investors within the country to invest, to have higher employment, to have higher budget revenue coming from taxation, but also that we don't see hemorrhaging on the other side, to be able to get the growth going, to get the standard of living of people higher, and to have to be able to establish a normal democracy where we can also deal with organized crime, with a judiciary that will be independent, that will not protect certain individuals that are connected to organized crime at this stage. I mean, just for example, in 2012, there was a group of the so-called Balkan criminals. They were arrested in Spain, and it was found out that all of them had original Croatian passports. And they were from all over. They were maybe some from Croatia, others from Serbia, Montenegro. So they all had official Croatian passports, and the investigations led directly to Croatia's Minister of Interior. And the track record of issuing these passports since 2006, no high-level official in Croatia was held responsible, and the case was just died out. And Croatia, I have to say that Croatia is a NATO country, and NATO charter says that members of NATO are countries of rule of law. Croatia certainly does not qualify to be NATO country, and it just joined the EU last year in July.
Let me go, Joel.
Just to answer your question, which is a very appropriate one about the role of the church in the Balkans. And it is certainly very disturbing to find out, as Natasha is mentioning, about these deals in a non-transparent way with the corrupt regime or corrupt networks in Croatia and the region. But it's also disturbing when churches of any category, whether it's Protestant or Catholic in Croatia, elsewhere, when they receive government funding to be legally recognized, it not only marginalizes the churches efforts to really speak up for promoting reforms, but it makes it very difficult for church leaders to stand up and say, well, we want real reforms because we have issues to deal with like youth unemployment, with poverty, and other areas as well. So I think the church has an opportunity, whether it's the Catholic community, the Protestant community, to just say no to government aid and to basically start standing for the real principles if it does espouse to bring about positive changes in the community.
Now, let's go back to the personal for a moment as we zigzag back and forth. I mean, both of you are evangelicals, and how did that happen? And how do you think the evangelical church could gain more support in the Balkans, and where it really hasn't been very substantial, if at all? And how fundamental is that theological change to the political and economic change that we have? So personal, and then if you can lead into the policy aspects, this would be good.
Right. Actually, the faith skipped religion, skipped generation in Croatia and the entire Balkans. So my grandparents would be religious, or they had faith. My parents not, and the third generation, which would be me, it's finding itself. So they're people that are searching. They're not sure where they stand, and it's a secular society, as well as the whole Europe is becoming more secularized. And one of, I think that for the whole Europe and Croatia is partly due to corruption that is seen in Catholic Church. Personally, I have, my grandmother was a believer, and she was strongly anchored in faith, in Christian faith, and she actually brought me up when my parents were working, and so I have that value system that I received from her. And I became actually a Protestant with my husband, Joel, who strengthened the faith, and I see myself, and I know I am, and I know why I grew up the way I did, and where my value system stand. I think that there is a void in Croatia, and I think that for the church, for the Protestant church, there is a great opportunity because the way the Protestant church operates, and as I see it, its workings here in the States, and knowing that many people are disappointed with the Catholic Church, and that they need an anchor, and the anchor is very crucial because. The way in Croatia, actually in the entire Europe, the top-down approach, where the government is the entity that gives people rights, and that is seen in our constitutions, and even in the proposed EU constitution that started with Queen of Britain, King of Belgium, President of Czech Republic, and so on, give these rights to the people. So the people need to know that they have God-given rights. Mm-hmm. Among them are life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. And property rights is part of it. It's part of the work ethic and of being free to work, to earn, to keep, to maintain, to grow. And that kind of an anchor, they need to understand that that's God-given, and that the mindset starts changing in starting to have that ideology to reject the top-down approach, which is being imposed on the people now by politically corrupt regime, and to take a charge, like the United States or founders had. Originally designed, we the people. So for Croatia and other countries in the region, for the people to understand that they are the ones that decide about their country because they have God-given rights and they don't depend on the state.
Right. Well, this is important. I often hear conservatives talking about the importance of the rule of law almost in the abstract. But I wonder how people who aren't used to that can grasp it unless they have an understanding, first of all, as you say, that there are rights given by God rather than just given by kings or monarchs or dictators. And secondly, when you read the Bible and you see that as, in a sense, God's constitution that's there, it's in written form, and we're taught, trust that, put not your trust in princes, trust God's word, that also tends to lead you to thinking about the rule of law rather than the rule of important kings and princes and so forth. So if we go for the rule of law without having that underlying theological base, are we likely to be successful?
You've brought out a very important point, and I think that has been a significant absence in continental Europe. If you look at continental Europe, it has continental law. We, as a nation here, citizens in the United States, have much to be thankful for because we're at the eve of the 800th anniversary of the Magna Carta. And the Magna Carta was a defining moment, not certainly provided all that we needed at that stage, but it certainly limited the monarch's significant control over people. And then our founding fathers in the United States certainly communicated that with Jefferson and Thomas Jefferson, John Adams, and others that really communicated the importance of individual liberty, the freedom of speech, the freedom of religion. And I think that is something that is absent in continental Europe, where, as you've rightfully mentioned, there is significant dependency upon the state and the government apparatus. That is why there is such a following for the European Union, rather than individuals understanding God-given rights. And I think that's an important element that is certainly echoed by people and individuals in the United States that understand liberty, freedom, based upon our values.
Okay, so our tendency has been to, as is often the case, to throw money at, I mean, here's a very needy area of the world, and our tendency has been to throw money there rather than, in essence, be helping people to see God-given rights and where those come from. And if we keep doing that, we're just giving money basically to the oligarchs to go bank elsewhere and create more problems. So these are some of the things to think about, and time for any of you who wish to ask questions to our experts here. And they can be, again, ranging from the personal to the policy to the deeper theological ones. Let's see, hand up over here. Do we have, okay, only one microphone today, so there's a dash to the other side. Go ahead, sir.
Excuse me, on precisely that question, you've converted my question into maybe just a little background, because that phrase, that rule of law, has become such a cliche in this region, and it often opens the way to a lot of chicanery. Different people mean different things. You've got the European Union, you've got the United Nations, you've got the American Bar Association, you've got the Balkan Institute here in Washington, and other Soros-funded entities like that. Everyone has a different agenda they're trying to slip in under that phrase, rule of law. So, I mean, to pose it in terms of, God's law seems to be very important. Who defines, I guess what I want to ask, who defines what is meant by the rule of law right now in the Balkans?
Right. The judges, actually, we had an event at the Heritage Foundation with Judge Henry Saad. He's a judge in Michigan Court of Appeals. And he said he had actually a conference with judges in Croatia, and they were exchanging ideas, and Croatians were asking American judges Americans were actually asking, how do you decide a particular case if you don't have a body of law that you have built up as an independent country? And then they said, well, we decide as we go. And then he says, so practically that is the problem of continental law as well, because the continental law, different judges can decide differently on the same type of the case.
they can come up with different decisions, because there's no interpretation as in Anglo-Saxon, where in Anglo-Saxon law, whatever is not forbidden by law, it's permitted, and there's a precedent that the decision is based on. But in continental Europe, whatever is not permitted by law is explicitly forbidden, and then the judge can decide on the merits of the case. And as I said, in the same type of the case, two judges may have totally different decision, and that is acceptable. So the problem is in interpretation of the law, but also in the fact that there's the rule of law, as I understand it, is that everybody's the same. So everybody's the same in front of the law, and the law cannot change capriciously or to have a different treatment of different people in the same situation. So that's what we see that is being broken, actually, that you have certain companies that are exempt from the law, or certain individuals are exempt from the law, that they are either named sometimes or they are implied by the way the law is written. So that there are lots of and I think these things have to be addressed, and we are trying to see how to bring foreign judges, visiting judges and visiting prosecutors to Croatia and other parts of the Balkans, in order for them to assist honest domestic judges and prosecutors, that they are in the system, but either they don't get the cases, they are afraid sometimes to do the right thing, or they're corrupt. There are some that are corrupt, but they are honest judges, and for those honest judges to surface, we would need to bring visiting judges and prosecutors, and also to see a new generation of law graduates to enter the profession, to see it as an honest calling, because now it's not an honest calling. So you have the same people rotating, and there's no way out, because they continue to protect the political elite that is corrupt. And just to mention one anecdote, actually, Joel and I organized meetings for a Minister of Justice of Croatia who claimed to be a reformer, with Chief Justice of Royal Courts, and also with British, like a Minister of Justice or Attorney General. And in the conversation, Lord Falconer asked he actually started a conversation with Minister of Justice and said, so Croatia is an independent country. That was in 2006, or 5 actually. And she said, yes, Croatia is an independent country. So when did you gain your independence? And she says, in 1991. So you have independent judiciary? Of course, yes, we have independent judiciary. And he said, so you fired all your judges in 1991? And there was an awkward silence. And so how many former communist countries fired all their judges in the transition? That's a question.
And that's a great question, Professor, in the sense that, yes, the rule of law is so important, but it is not well understood on the continent Europe, but also you need a society that has values, that understands what it is to not steal, to not bribe. And I believe that is where civil society, churches play an important role to impart those very basic fundamental values. So it's certainly institutions like the Hadriatic Institute for Public Policy and others in advancing the rule of law, protection of property rights, but you do need an endeavor by churches, and I think that's where the Roman Catholic Church, the Protestant churches have an opportunity to communicate the importance of creating a moral society. And it has missed that opportunity, but I hope and trust that in the days to come that there will be a robust discussion to address this very fundamental issue in the societies of Eastern Europe as well as the West.
Other questions? It's odd, by the way, that as you hope to bring people from the Balkans here to see the rule of law operating in the United States, increasingly we seem to be becoming more like the Balkans in terms of presidents or attorney generals deciding what laws they want to enforce and what they don't want to enforce. But go ahead.
First of all, thank you very much for coming. And as you mentioned, Croatia just joined the EU last year, and I was wondering what you thought about that. I know that the EU has been touted as the way for former communist countries to prosper and become part of Western Europe, and they at least ostensibly require certain democratic standards of new members. But I was wondering, has membership in the EU, do you think it'll help Croatia or hurt them, or not make much of a difference? I know they still have a lot of corruption, and many countries still struggle economically, even though they're part of the Eurozone. So if you could just tell us your thoughts on that.
Right, that's a good question, because we were, practically, the process of accession, we thought it's a good process because it will actually force Croatia establish the rule of law, independent judiciary, protection of property rights, because we believed that the EU will apply enough pressure through their to all those negotiating chapters that were affecting those areas, that Croatia will, by the time it is ready to become a member, to put in place the rule of law, independent judiciary, and protection of property rights. What we've seen is that none of that has happened. So really, what we hoped to achieve through the EU accession process has not been achieved. On the other side, Croatia was forced to give away its maritime zone on the sea, which it had rights based on the UN Charter. On the other side, EU level laws supersede UN Charter in that area. So while some countries had that exemption and were able to keep their maritime zones or exclusive economic zone on the sea, Croatia was not able to do that. So Croatia had to give up the sea and give up an opportunity to grow more grapes, which is ridiculous. I mean, people in the States all laugh about it when they hear it, but it's really impossible, I mean, to understand how can that be a commitment imposed on a country. But Croatia accepted it, and the countries are accepting what Brussels says. So really, they said, you cannot grow any more grapes. Reasoning being, we have too many grapes, too much grapes in Europe. We have plenty of wine, and the French lobbied Brussels to practically forbid new planting in Croatia, and that happened really. So practically Croatia is not allowed to plant certain kinds of grapes because it would jeopardize the wine industry of French or Italians or whoever. So the mindset which is imposed is for Croatians not to look if there would be entrepreneurial Croatia, if there was a young people that would be involved in new initiatives, to think about the world as a market. No, they have to think as European Union as a market and as customs union, so apparently they can trade with the world only if Brussels allows them so. So as you see that constellation, it looks like it is for the other countries as well. So smaller countries within European Union are really at the mercy of the bigger countries. And that's not fair, and that's not right, and that's not free market, and that's not the rule of law in the end.
To answer your question, which is a great question on the European Union itself, this year the European Union itself came out and stated that corruption is widespread in all of Europe, $120 billion, they stated. However, the European Union exempted itself from any investigation and research into EU institutions, which is collecting taxpayer money and dispersing it to corrupt countries in Eastern Europe and elsewhere. So in a sense, the European Union has become a club for privileged individuals. So there is an incentive given to a country. Yes, come and join the European Union, but it's an incentive for the political elite. They will get greater jobs and opportunities. There'll be a great recruitment of individuals to translate. So there's be a group of translators heading to Brussels, which are now in Brussels. So Brussels is growing and flourishing, while countries like Croatia and the Balkans are experiencing the opposite effect. It's more about political expediency, as we talked earlier. The fact that Croatia's destiny, the Balkans' destiny, has not been about the individual Croatian or the individual Bosnian or Serbian. It has been determined by other countries from the time pre-World War I to the World War II, post-World War II era to right now. Their fate has been determined by other countries rather than individuals in their country. Croatia never had a George Washington, unfortunately. Yeah. And that's where we lack principal leaders, and when those that are principal leaders do rise up, the government and the corrupt structures and communists, and even, I must say, pro-EU journalists in Europe are partly to be blamed. The State Department of the United States and a flawed foreign policy in continuing to send aid rather than holding to account, saying, unless you meet this criteria, then we're going to support you. So it's been a lose-lose proposal for the people of Croatia and the Balkans.
And as John mentioned earlier, there's 1 million of illegal votes for a country of 4 million people in Croatia. So that basically half of the parliament, current parliament, could have been voted in based on illegal votes. And we raised that issue with BBC, and there were interviews done with the EU Commissioner, and with it was in public domain. However, EU hasn't done anything about it, hasn't written about it, because they're supposed to write progress reports. They talked about different issues, but never addressed the electoral fraud, which means that the political establishment is obviously working well with Brussels, and there's no need to tackle that.
So we have our problems with illegal voting that usually doesn't make for more than 2 or 3% of the voters. I mean, a lot of dead people in Chicago vote, and traditionally in South Texas and so forth. But 25% essentially, 25% of the electorate. So you can't have confidence in the results of any elections.
No.
So, okay. Other questions?
Thank you for coming. For those of us that aren't very familiar with the Balkans, what makes the Balkans unique? What would they offer the EU if they could?
If I could just answer your question, Professor, in the fact that the Republic of Ragusa, there's a connection between the Republic of Ragusa and the United States. That was the city of Dubrovnik, which is known today. The Republic of Ragusa was the first republic that recognized the United States as an independent country. There's so many great things that Croatia provides. It's a beautiful country, 1,000 islands, a wonderful place to visit. The people are great. Individual citizens are warm, are hospitable. And in fact, the tie that you and I wear today came originally from Croatia, the cravata. Croatia could provide resources if it was allowed freedom in the agricultural sector. But it is not, because of the EU cap laws, the Common Agricultural Policy. It would be able to provide fish for the entire Europe or beyond, but that rights have been given to the European Union. And with my good Spanish friends, the Spaniard fleet is going to come through the Adriatic region and not benefit the individuals, fishermen, and small businesses in the region as well. If you want to add to that, Natasha, on that question.
Maybe from negative side, it's the root cause problem. If you think about Americans dying in Afghanistan and allies dying in Afghanistan, while the Balkan route was flourishing, so 75% of opium of the world opium is coming from Afghanistan. So while soldiers are dying, the Balkan route is flourishing, with organized crime flourishing via Iran, Turkey, Balkans, including Croatia, and this has not been addressed appropriately. So you have reports showing that drug trafficking is financing terrorist groups like Al-Qaeda, Hamas, Hezbollah. If you cut the Balkan route, and we cannot cut Balkan route if we don't deal with judiciaries in the region. Because, as I said, at this stage we have coexistence of organized crime and political corruption. And it flourishes because the same judiciary is not addressing one or the other. And the money laundering is facilitated by, at this stage for Croatia we know, by Austrian and Liechtenstein's banking institutions and corporations. it has to be addressed. Europe is not addressing it.
Other questions? You know, the history of the Balkans that I'm just getting into now is really fascinating, and you've often seen political leaders in the West and in Central Europe just looking at maps and drawing and redrawing lines dividing various countries, the Congress of Berlin in 1878 and so forth. So there's been an enormous amount of mischief done by European leaders, probably also done by President Woodrow Wilson, as far as looking at a map and saying, oh, let's make this country here and that country there. Overall, would the Balkans be better if with less involvement from the Western United States, given the amount of damage that we've often done?
No, I think that the U.S. leadership is necessary.
Okay.
It is because through our experience and through history, we've seen that Woodrow Wilson didn't do any mischief, actually.
Really?
No.
we could debate that a little bit, but
when you think about the mischief that has been done by imperial powers, always imperial powers, on one side Russia, on the other side Austro-Hungarian and Hungarian Empire together with at that time Germany. So these powers trying to divide Balkans, and Ottomans before that, they are always present in the region, and they are doing the mischief. And I think that looking at the history and the U.S. involvement in the World War I, World War II, and the recent Balkan wars hasten all three of them, so practically hasten the end of all three wars.
Okay.
We believe that U.S. leadership is actually indispensable.
And how would you like to see that U.S. leadership being exerted? In what ways?
We would like to see concrete steps wherever U.S. has a leverage to do so. There's a way through NATO in order, so probably not to allow any funding or just do the revision of NATO members such as Croatia to see whether they qualify. So probably do not allow Croatia to be a full standing member of NATO until it puts in place the rule of law, independent judiciary, and we know what that means. Also, not to allow any funding to come to Croatia from the U.S. side, and why would U.S. taxpayers be sending money to corrupt politicians that end up in Liechtenstein? So really, to address the issue of any kind of grant funding, that donor money that would come to Croatia, to be stipulated and to be required to be used for certain purpose. And I believe that visiting judges and prosecutors that would assist honest judges that are in the system, as I said, but they are afraid to come out, or afraid to, or they're just we have to encourage them to come out and to get the young generation to get involved as well. So there are ways, and I think that the U.S. leadership should also, by getting involved, we may see even more responsibility from the European side, because Europe is in all these wars in the past. Europe gets involved, tempted by stronger U.S. leadership as well.
Yeah.
But I would say that in that light of what Natasha mentioned, is that American citizens have a greater responsibility to affirm the rule of law and to hold to account its leadership too, because there's been a number of weak fronts that we have seen in that. What Natasha was talking about, I think, is so important. This deployment of independent judges has worked very successfully in the Commonwealth countries, and the Honorable Maurice McTeague is one that has advised the Adriatic Institute and others in bringing forth this issue of visiting judges. It has worked well in Hong Kong. It has worked in a number of former British colonies in helping raise a new group of honest, principled judges, and at the same time help confiscate illicit enrichment. If you have the opportunity to confiscate this illicit enrichment, this won't go into influencing the media. This won't go into blocking reforms and reform leaders. So I think there is an opportunity to see that happen. And there is precedent in Croatia and Bosnia that there were visiting judges there. So it's nothing new. It's not about sovereignty. They would always work alongside Croatia's judges, but to make sure that there would be a transformation in upholding the rule of law.
And also to, as you mentioned, what needs to be done is to raise a new generation of ethical leaders, ethical and principled leaders that would be able
that we would be able, from the US side, we would be able to work with in establishing democracies that are based on the rule of law and protection of property rights.
And to that effect, Natasha, that you mentioned, which is so important on raising a new generation of leaders, here in the audience is a student of Patrick Henry College who is of Croatian descent. And in December of 2013, the Adriatic Institute and this young student, who is a brilliant, dedicated individual for the rule of law, Teresa Scanlon, became Adriatic Institute's Liberty Ambassador. And we look forward to the opportunity to be able to raise a new generation of leaders within Croatia and within the Croatian diaspora in America, which can do more to support positive initiatives. And that's what we look forward to. We are optimistic, of course, for Croatia, otherwise we would not be doing this endeavor here, or being a part of it. And I think through other like-minded individuals in the States and other parts, from all corners, we've seen what happened in Ukraine. We've seen what has happened in other parts of the world when individuals like Natasha and others are willing to take that step. It's not easy. It's an arduous task. It's a thankless task. I know it. I'm standing next to Natasha when these things come our way. But they are positive results. And if in this country, if people like Franklin, and also individuals like Jefferson and Adams did not stand up for liberty, like Patrick Henry, calling for liberty and the rule of law with a commitment to faith, we would not have seen in America. And America is not just only liberty's best hope. I believe that America is the world's best hope when it comes to standing for the rule of law and liberty. So as much reforms are needed in America, much assistance to independent leaders that are doing the good work.
Well, that's a good note on which to conclude. I tend to be optimistic about Patrick Henry College, but somewhat pessimistic about the United States government and a lot of leaders actually giving their wisdom to other places, since we see all the problems here. But it's good to hear that still the United States remains a city on a hill and is looked upon as holding the beacon of liberty, even though sometimes we tend to be here very pessimistic. So.
Yes, thank you so much on behalf of the college, too, for sharing with us the work of the Adriatic Institute, and we wish you every success. Also, those on the webcast and studio audience, let me remind you to come back tomorrow. I believe we start at 12:40 tomorrow. Marvin Olasky will be interviewing Cynthia Wentz, who's the CEO of the Source for Women, which is a pregnancy help center with 3 locations in Texas. I think you'll find her story very compelling. She underwent abortion 3 times herself before having a dramatic reconsideration. So come back tomorrow and hear Cynthia Wentz at 12:40. But for now, please give your thanks for this interview to Marvin Olasky, Natasha Srdoc, and Joel Anand Samy.
Thank you, Dr. Walker. Thank you.